G'day folks, welcome to Backyard Legends with Bevo. I'm your host Bevan Jones, where we talk to some absolute legends, from celebrity chefs to superstars of sport and entertainment icons. They tell us about the windows that they broke while playing backyard cricket, to building amazing tree houses and slip and slides as well, and how they relax in their backyards today. So pull up your deck chairs, put your feet up and get ready for some ripping stories.
Welcome to Garden Master, the home of quality sheds, celebrating 50 years of Australian-made quality and backyard expertise. We offer a range of products: sheds, aviaries, animal shelters, shade houses and more. All built to last with our 25-year structural guarantee. 5 decades of craftsmanship and passion have created the Garden Master legacy. Join thousands of Australians who trust us for their backyard needs. Visit gardenmaster.net.au today to explore our range and redeem your special anniversary offer. Australian made, Australian quality. Garden Master, the home of quality sheds.
Well, Titus O'Reily, welcome to Backyard Legends with Bevo.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be with you. And I'm beaming in from Perth, one of the great cities. So I'm looking out the window from my hotel at the brand new spanking stadium, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, of course, the test match there starting in a couple of days' time. Very exciting.
Yeah, no, it'd be great, although I have to head off before it. So I've timed this terribly. But anyway, I'll catch the Boxing Day test instead.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Speaking of the Boxing Day test match, certainly one of the things growing up as a young lad myself was on that Boxing Day, having a leftover lunch and then playing backyard cricket with my family and that sort of thing. Tell us about going back to your own days growing up as a child, Titus. Your backyard summers, what they look like. And you mentioned before you had siblings as well.
Yeah, I have two younger brothers, but my second brother's only a year younger than me, so we were always pretty competitive. And then the other one's about 4 years. But we grew up in Eltham, and Eltham in Melbourne, for those that don't know, it was it was the bush in the 80s when I was there. It's now a lot of it's been turned into sort of, big tracts of homes and things, but it was real bush. So we had about 20 kids that lived in the streets around us.
Oh.
And so, it was BMX bikes all the time. And this is when parents in the 80s didn't care where you were. It wasn't like now. We would take off in the morning and come back maybe for lunch, and then you knew when it was nighttime, it was time to get, when the sun started to set, you'd come home, and that was it. No one knew where you were. And so we'd try to do that a lot, but a lot of the times it was big games of cricket in the street. So we'd play pretty intensely for a long time, and they'd go on for days. We'd be very serious about it, and I absolutely loved it.
You know what? I couldn't agree with you more, and it's a shame that nowadays, like, the younger ones are on their screens so much and don't get to relive those same memories that we used to as kids.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting about, my kids have grown up and everything's at the touch of their fingers, like any show they want to watch, any song you want to listen to. I mean, it's kind of amazing. We take it for granted now, but the idea that you and I think of a song all of a sudden from any decade, we can just have it playing on our phones in 2 seconds. So when you when you grow up with that sort of, I do wonder if when you grow up with that sort of constant fun and entertainment, I really am a big believer in, great thing about test cricket and sport is I grew to love it because you'd be there with your parents and you'd be bored. And so by being bored, you'd learn to sort of watch and start to get interested, and I think being bored is kind of important for kids because it's kind of when you invent these games and you play these things together.
So true. Speaking of that, tell us about some of the games that you remember creating as a kid with your siblings.
Well, we used to play a lot in the backyard and a lot in the street. We used to play this version of sort of ice hockey, except it was with brooms and a thing on the road. So we play that for ages. And everyone really liked that game. That was one that we played a lot. There was a lot of variants of tag and things like that, but really intense games of cricket, really intense games of football, a lot of basketball in the backyard, me and my brothers too, which used to always get heated. It would always end in mum. It would go until mum came out and told us she could hear us swearing and we needed to We really would go at each other the whole time. So it was great fun. And then whenever it was raining, my brother and I would pull out Test Match, that famous old game that,
Oh, yes.
I bought it for my kids and they've changed the bowling action and a few things, and I was not very happy. But we would set up pretend like we would draw them. We would set up pretend like advertising signs around the ground, and we would get Lego figures and put fans and camera, and then we would play full games where we'd score them properly, and we'd commentate them, and we'd put a tape on and record it, and we would commentate the games. And they would last until one of us would crack it because they were losing. And I did years ago, I don't know where they are now, I actually pulled out one of the tapes of us commentating one of these games, and it was very embarrassing. It was very cringeworthy, but it was just that's how full on into it we were. And I mean, I think to go back to what you were saying, we didn't have anything else to do, there wasn't much else to do. So you would come up with these really full on games because that was the fun of it. And yeah, so there was lots of stuff we were doing all the time, but sport was the big one for us.
And where did that passion first come from? Were your parents into sport as well?
Dad grew up playing. He came out from Ireland when he was 20, and he grew up playing like soccer and rugby union. He played Irish schoolboys for Ireland, so he's a pretty decent player. And then he ran marathons, which a combination of 500 games of rugby union and marathons left him with 2 knee reconstructions on each knee, which to me seemed excessive. He was a man that didn't. He's one of those guys of that previous generation where pain is not something you talk about or mention or let interfere with you in any way, shape, or form. He would say he was always into sport, and so that kind of was. But it was also just living in a street with all these kids. That was just what you did. You'd be looking for things to do. And that's what you did just all the time. Like TV wasn't an option. There was no iPad or video games, so it was like out into the street and whatever game everyone could invent. And if someone had been given a frisbee or a football or a soccer ball or whatever, we just tried to do it.
And obviously, you're well known as a comedian and also a writer. We'll speak about your new book coming out a little bit later on. But where did the passion and where did this journey sort of begin for you, Titus? Were you a funny lad growing up as a kid?
Well, I think I was a smart ass, like I was always the kid in class in trouble for talking too much and all that sort of stuff. So, there was always that element to it. But no, I went into a normal corporate career for years, and I just started a Twitter account and a blog, about 12 years ago now. And I really didn't think it would do anything. I thought it would be like the gym for me, where I would talk for 5 minutes and then, do it for 2 weeks and then be bored and stop going. And, when I started, I wasn't even trying to do jokes originally. I was trying to write serious pieces and that no one read them, not even my parents. And so I started to by mistake, I did a sort of, not mistake, but I just did a jokey kind of column one day. And it sort of got picked up a bit, not like hundreds of thousands of people or anything, but a few people sent it around and I got picked up a few more followers. And I just thought, oh, maybe I'll do a bit more of that. Still not thinking it would go anywhere, and it just kept growing and growing, and then and then I thought, oh, this will be a hobby for me, and then it got to the point where something was offered radio jobs, and I got given a book deal, and something I was doing stand up and doing all this sort of stuff, and yeah, it sort of just got to the point where one day I can remember very vividly, I worked out I can quit my day job, so it was one of those moments where you actually can walk in and say, and I liked where I was working, and I liked who I worked for, so it wasn't like screw you guys, I'm out of here. But I sort of said I've got a book deal, I've got this coming up, and I think I'm going to give it a go. And he was like, I think it's a good idea, And so yeah, so that was about 6 years ago.
And in terms of coming up with your material for shows, you mentioned before that you had some really great times with your siblings growing up, and I love the story about 20 of you playing cricket on the road, and so I remember doing the same thing myself. But do you sort of incorporate some of those stories into your comedy routines as well, Titus?
Yeah, I mean, I think I play up all the time to it, and it's kind of true, which is just my lifelong obsession and the fact that I, probably put sport above everything else to an unhealthy level. And I find myself, there's some stories from when I was a kid, but I also do a lot of ones about how my kids react to it now, because they've grown up with me being this massive sports fan, and they've got to try and figure it all out. And they're used to me being absolutely nuts. Like occasionally, one of them will say, "I'm thinking of not barracking for Melbourne," and that's kind of they get a fair bit of that. I mean, my son said to me once, "Remember that long premiership drought we had, Dad?" And he was 6. That's when they won the premiership. I said, "There's no way. You didn't have a premiership drought. I had a premiership drought. You're spoiled."
So true, so true. And you mentioned before you're living in Kew in Victoria. What's your backyard look like today, Titus? Is it one of those spaces? Are you the sort of person that likes to? Obviously, you mentioned before you're doing an Australian tour at the moment. Are you the sort of person that likes to come back home and just relax and sit in the backyard and come up with new ideas for your book or for your comedy routines, maybe sitting in the hammock and that sort of thing?
Well, we just moved. We had a place in Clifton Hill, which we loved there, but there was literally no backyard almost there. And so we would go down to the park a lot with the kids to play sport, but it was kind of hard, and so we found this place in Kew by complete luck, really. And it's got quite a good backyard, and it's got a fish pond and all this sort of stuff. And I've become quite obsessed with watching the fish. I feel like this is my first step into being a really old man, and I get obsessed each morning about how the fish are going. But it's big enough that the kids can ride. There's a quite a steep driveway that the kids can ride their bikes down, which I remember very fondly from when I was young. And it's a big enough backyard that they can kick a soccer ball around. We can kick the footy and all that sort of stuff, and even play cricket and that. So I've been really enjoying it because it's been a while, and so many places people live these days, just we don't have what you had. I mean, when I was growing up in Eltham, we had a big backyard, but the backyard was kind of irrelevant because all around us were empty blocks, bush, so the backyard was fine, but half the time we'd be building a tree house or, playing some game in another thing and all that. And, so I do worry about the next generation, how little they'll get that. And even if they're at home, they don't even have a backyard that's really, I mean, this thing of building the house so big that it really goes to the fence. Is this what's behind Australia's eventual collapse?
Yeah.
Can I worry?
Yeah, so true, so true. Because there used to be so much space, for us all to do these things. And I don't know if there is if you're in 10K of most city centres in Australia these days. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Wanted to ask you about the treehouse. So what did that look like when you were building those growing up?
Oh, we had lots of ones. I mean, and I can remember we'd have like, no, I look back now and can't believe it, but we were like, 7, 8, 6, 7, 8, and there were kids as young as 5, 4. And we would all be together, and we would have hammers and nails and rope. You know what I mean? Like stuff that you just go, like we just go to the shed and get what we want. No one would go like nowadays. If a kid walked through the house with a hammer, you could be like running up to grab it off them. I mean, I probably would with my kids. We would take saws. We would take everything. We would be. It was like the Swiss Family Robinson. We would all build these things, and they were high. They were like. If anyone had fell, they wouldn't have survived, But so they weren't amazing. It was a sort of, you'd nail a bunch of planks of wood up a tree that, probably not doing the tree a great deal of good, but as your ladder, and then you'd put a few planks across somewhere as a platforms, and you'd sit up there. They didn't look good, but they were functional. And that's what we do, and it was always, and then there'd be a fight. So someone else would go and start another treehouse somewhere else,
That's so good. Have you done something similar with your own kids as well? Like build cubby houses or things like that, or?
No, well, not as much. I mean, it is funny how much the kids just, we didn't have a backyard in the last place. And then, they sort of, I mean, I do find it, I think all parents relate to it. I do find it hard to get them off the screens. I mean, I don't let them on it all the time, but, they even when we're doing something fun, we'll be in the middle of doing something really fun, and they'll go, "Dad," and I go, "Yeah," and they go, "Can we play, can I watch iPad?" And I'm like, "We're having a beautiful moment, Like I remember being down at the beach, and we were down. My parents live in Rye, and we were it was a beautiful, calm but warm day, And Mum and Dad had one of those, sort of surf skis, but it was flat. And me and my son, who was like about 5 at the time, we were out halfway out, and it was like glass, the water, so we could go quite far out. And we were looking out over Mount Martha and, the shoreline, and it was just this idyllic moment. And I said to my son, "This is really nice, isn't it?" And he goes, "I wish I was watching iPad."
Oh, that's harsh.
So I do find it a bit harder these days. I don't think it's sad how much it's captured them, really.
It is sad, isn't it? But then, like you said before, at least we've got those good times to look back on, and at least we grew up in those good old days of playing cricket on the road and riding your bikes and what have you as well. Hey folks, do you love your footy? Are you over 35 and want to be part of something very special on Anzac Day in 2025 in Gallipoli? Well, check this out.
The Slugs plan to play men's and women's games here at this soccer ground, the closest to the Gallipoli battlefields during the 2025 commemorations. The idea to make it spectacular, to fill this entire area with Aussie Anzac pilgrims. Vincent Malia tours with the Southern Slugs. Footy, he says, is perfect to honour the Diggers.
They would love it, I'm sure, because it's bringing Australia over there, isn't it?
And are you much of a barbecue enthusiast as well? And then what's your signature barbecue dish, if so, Titus?
Well, yeah, no, I am good on the barbecue. It's the one thing I'm a terrible cook in every way, but I'm good at cooking the barbecue. In fact, my mum insists I cook it because my dad's of the school of you burn everything until it's like that. You make sure everything's super well done. Like we grew up on that. Like the steak is cooked, a lot. There's no medium rare. It's like it's not even well done. It's like becoming charcoal is my dad's approach. So my mum will say, "You do it." So I'm quite good at that. That's the only thing I can do. So I'll cook all of that all the time. But everything else is a bit beyond me. I'm a bit hopeless at everything else. But I do like a barbecue, and I especially like a barbecue because it's the one form of cooking where you can just smash beers while doing it and no one blinks an eye.
So true. And what's your favourite memories growing up as a kid with Barbies?
I just remember we used to have all the time, like, the parents would have everyone around. I remember doing the cup quite a lot. Cup day would be a huge barbecue and everyone would come around and there'd be all these adults around the barbecue drinking and joking around. And, when you're a kid and you're sort of getting to that age where you can kind of follow the humour a bit of adults and it's sort of interesting and you're not quite a teenager who doesn't want to be anywhere near them. And I remember having quite fond memories of that. They'd all be talking about sport and footy and telling all these crazy stories and progressively getting more drunk as the day went on. It was always very amusing. It was great fun. I remember all that. And they'd just be like, it was a different time. People would show up and there'd be like 40 kids there, like there was I remember a lot of being regularly at things where there were just kids everywhere. You couldn't know them all. It was absolutely amazing. And, I don't know if it happens as much with play dates now, but everyone used to have 4 or 5 kids. So if they all showed up, there was a lot.
Yeah, so true. It's a changing time, isn't it? And any memories growing up as well? Like I used to love doing the sprinklers in the backyard on those hot days and the slip and slides. Did you do anything like that as well, Titus?
Yeah, we did all of that. We used to get the hose out all the time and spray each other, and the sprinklers were always great fun. So we did a lot of that. We do the slip and slide with the kids now a bit. So, it's sort of a poor man's pool, but it works to a point.
no injuries, I hope.
We do water balloons and everything, which I don't know if you can do them as much as you used to, but, there's probably an environmental reason why they're terrible. But we used to do all that. And we had a lot of water guns. And they used to make water guns that look like real guns. You don't do that. They don't have them anymore. So we used to do a lot of that as well. We did. We had a friend who had an outdoor above ground pool, one of those old above ground pools. And one day it broke while we were in it. And we ended up about 7 houses down the road because the water just took out all the fences and just went with it. It was like the greatest surfing wave I've ever caught. And amazingly, we're all fine. And we all there's like four of us. We all trudged back up, through seven backyards. And, there's every fence is being knocked over and imagine it did look like a tsunami had gone through. And we walked back up and we said to the parents, they're all having drinks, we said, the pool collapsed. And they were like, oh. And they wandered down, have a look. Oh, that's annoying. Not one of them went, are you kids okay? And that sort of sums up the 80s, right? It was like, you're all walking, you're all talking, so obviously you're all fine. What about the bloody pool? So
That is a great story. I love that. And speaking of
I
great,
remember it was quite fun until we realised like it was getting late. We didn't know what was happening. Suddenly you're 7 houses down the street.
oh, that is one of the best stories I've heard. That's a ripper. Hey, speaking of good stories, though, you've got a book coming out very soon called Seven Deadly Sins of Sport. Explain more about this and the idea behind it as well, Titus.
Well, I mean, I'm always looking for funny sports stories. I love the human kind of side of sport and the silly thing people do. And I was looking at, while I was researching other stuff, I was like, I couldn't think of many top sports people that basically haven't gotten to controversy, that haven't, and, I started to think of like, the idea of sinning and sport and how basically you can get away with it all in sport in the main, but also couldn't find many people that hadn't sinned, and the only one I can really think of is Roger Federer almost. One of the few that hasn't committed a sin on some regard. So I started mapping to all the seven deadly sins, greed and sloth and wrath and all of that, the different ones. And it was just a great way to kind of look at all the silly stories of stuff people have got up to. And then also just the temptations that are thrown at sports people. When I was 20, I wasn't famous and had no money and no one was interested in me. It's quite easy to stay out of trouble, but some of these sports stars, it's almost like if you give $200 million to an 18-year-old, it kind of can go pear-shaped sometimes.
Yes. Oh, you've got to have the Booney beer record in there, surely.
In the gluttony chapter, I do the Booney one, but then I also do I go back and look at the history of the Australian cricket team setting these drinking records on flights. So I go back to Rod Marsh and going back even further than that. So, there's some great stories about them doing that. And that's another example of how much the world's changed. I mean, when Rod Marsh got on the plane in Sydney and he got on and said to the air stewardess, as she was called at the time, he said, oh, I'm going to drink 44 cans of beer on this flight and break the record. And she said, you drink them, I'll bring them. Which I don't think you're getting that today if you get on a flight and say, I'm going to drink 44 cans of beer. I think they're giving you a responsible service of alcohol chat.
Yeah, like you said before, it's a changing world now, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, no. And while I often do agree it's probably for the better that everyone can't get on a flight and drink 44 cans of beer, it definitely means we have less funny stories. There were some bizarre stories back then.
Oh, I can't wait to read the book. Hey, and have you had a sporting legend over your place for a barbecue? And if so, who was it?
Oh, I can't think of anyone I've had over to my place of massive note, but probably my favourite thing I've done with a sporting hero in that sort of context is I did have a beer once when I was doing the front bar. I was a guest on that, and the guest after me was Rod Marsh. And Rod Marsh and I, we'd both done our segments, and we went and we had about another 45 minutes of the show to go. So we were just sitting in the green room. It was just him and I chatting, watching the show. And I said, would you like a beer, Rod? And he said, I'd love a beer. And I just thought, here I am drinking with Rod Marsh. This is like playing guitar with Jimi Hendrix. This is one of the highlights of my life. And he was just one of those guys that is, I know he's passed away now, but he's one of those guys that he didn't have to, and he sat and, when the show finished, Mick Malloy and Sam Pang and a few of the others came up and Andy Marr, and we all sat around with Rod for like hours, like late into the night. And he was just so generous telling us all these just absolutely fantastic stories. Like just, he didn't have to give us the time of day, and he was just hilarious the whole way, and every story was just an absolute cracker. It was one of my fondest moments of hanging out with anyone, really.
Yeah, that's an incredible story for sure. Thanks for sharing that, mate. I just want to ask you as well, how important do you think humour and storytelling are in connecting communities, especially around shared passions like sport?
Well, I have a kind of a theory with any information that the best way people remember things and learn is, a good story. And I think humor is a good way of making something entertaining. And I'm all very critical of how stuff like, people say, oh, Australia's history is boring. And I'm like, it's just taught terribly. Like they don't tell the stories well. They don't tell the right stories. And then also they make it either deadly serious or everyone's a hero. It's one or the other. Like everyone's the worst in the world or everyone's the best in the world. And there's no, like, when most of it's hilarious, they're just people doing things and it's all crazy, and you can find these great Australian stories that are just, absolutely amazing to learn about and tell you so much more about the history of the country. But you have to kind of to get people to listen to it. It has to be told well, and it has to have, I think, a bit of humour, because otherwise it's dry and boring. And I'm constantly amazed when I read some, doing research, I'm reading books, and it's just dry and boring, and you're going, oh, this is boring. And then they'll bury in a footnote, they'll say, oh, why this was all happening, he had 3 mistresses and went bankrupt and was arrested for fraud. And you go, well, hang on, where's that story? So... there's just so many stories like that I just think are like, absolutely out there and amazing. And I think unless you tell that the right way, it's an art, and it's the way that you kind of learn about things, and having an eye for it's the human side of things, And life is funny. I mean, it just is funny. We all are silly at times, and there's just funny things going on. And if people are entertained, they'll then go away. I like when people sometimes say to me about my books, they go, oh, your book was really funny. And I say, thanks. And then they go, it's actually really well researched. I actually learnt stuff. And I'm like, well, that's kind of the secret, right? Like I could write it without the humour, but you probably wouldn't have read it.
Oh, that's so true. Before we finish up today, Titus, you're doing an Australian tour at the moment. Give that a plug, and where can we buy this amazing book as well? And when will it be available?
Well, the book's out now, and so it's available everywhere, so wherever, good and bad bookstores, I believe. So it's everywhere. So it's called The 7 Deadly Sins of Sport. It's out through Penguin. And the national tour, I'm doing shows in Perth, Brisbane, Sydney, Canberra. I've done Melbourne and Adelaide already. I think most of them are sold out, but I'm going to do another tour next year, I think, because I love getting around and just telling great sports stories and reflecting on what a nutcase I am when it comes to barracking for my beloved Demons. And I can tell you, they give me a lot of material.
I feel the same about my Port Adelaide as well when choking in prelim finals.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, sometimes that's worse than being, there were years with Melbourne where I went with no hope, and it was kind of nicer than going in with hope sometimes. And failing in a prelim, and I did that at the 2018 against the Eagles in Perth, where I went over, and it was such a thumping that the Eagles supporters were being nice to me because it was so bad. It's bad when they're like, and can we buy you a drink? You okay? Do we need to call someone? They were handing me the number for Lifeline. It was quite full on.
Well, Titus O'Reily, thanks so much for coming on Backyard Legends with Bevo. Absolute pleasure, mate. Just hearing all these incredible stories of yourself growing up, and all the very best for the Australian tour and the book. And hopefully I get to meet you in person one of these days.
Oh, absolutely. And thanks for having me on. It's been really fun.